Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to EBV Resource webinars, monthly webinars. My name is Mirza Tihić. I'll be your host today. I'm with the Institute for Veterans and Military Families here at Syracuse University, and today we have a pleasure and honor to have a guest, Jim Patton, to talk to you about what are your strategic advantages and where are the landmines when we talk about veterans and entrepreneurship. Now, Mr. Jim Patton is the founder and plant manager of the Biz Success Factory. The Biz Success Factory exists to help veteran business owners facilitate the fulfillment of their dreams. Jim, a retired colonel, brings his 30 years of experience in the Army and 12 years of experience as a successful entrepreneur to the table to help veterans who want to be business owners to make sure that their minds are positioned for success and they're developing the skills to move from being a member of the military to being a business owner, building their own dreams. That said, Mr. Jim Patton, welcome, and we look forward to learn from you today.
Well, thank you, Mirza. First off, folks, let me give you a little more background on myself. I've been on my own as a business owner for just over 14 years now, and the presentation we're going to go through today is something I've been developing over that 14 years as I've brought, as Mirza said in my intro, 30 years of experience in the Army, and that's a kind of a varied experience. It was 12 years of active and 18 years as a drilling reservist. As I brought that to the table as an entrepreneur and a business owner, and what I found is that I've developed this hypothesis over time that veterans bring some things to the table as business owners that can certainly be strategic advantages to them, as the name implies. They also bring to the table with them some things that can be landmines that can, if they don't watch out for them, can cause them to sort of blow themselves up. So, like I said, I've been building this model over the last several years, and it's a dynamic model. This presentation pretty much changes every time I give it, depending upon the feedback I get from the particular group, and I always do it a little bit different the next time, given what I've heard from people in the previous presentation. So I certainly welcome feedback, comments, observations from y'all's perspective as veteran business owners yourselves. So what I've determined, as I said, is that there's a group of I find three. There may be more, but I've only found three so far that are kind of big buckets that are things that can give you strategic advantages. And if I could have the next slide, Jim. Here they are. Discipline, character, and character is one I've changed over time. Initially, I just called it work ethic. But as I listen to people and talk to them about the things that they do and they believe they bring to the table, I really lumped it into a broader category of character. And another idea that used to working long, odd hours, and I should have prefaced this with saying we'll take a 30,000-foot flyby of these three areas, and then we'll come back and look at each one of them in detail. So again, these are the pieces that are strategic advantages that if you leverage them, I believe they help veterans who, again, bring these to the table as a result of their experience, really give them some advantages over their non-veteran counterparts who are entrepreneurs and business owners. So again, that's the strategic advantages. And if you'd give me the next slide, please, Jim. These are the landmines. These are the things that you got to be careful about. And again, we're going to spend some time on each one of these. The first one, structure. Just the fact that you came out of an environment that there was just super structured, and now you're entirely on your own, has some unique things to work through. The second one is, oddly enough, decision making. I think folks think of military people as being super decisive, but I think there's a wrinkle there that we'll talk about that can get in your way as an entrepreneur. If you go into corporate America, it'll serve you well, but as an entrepreneur, maybe not so much. And then finally, I think veterans particularly have to rewrite their script on failure. so that they have to think differently about failure. So then there's another one, and I didn't mention these in the spin up, but if you could give me the next slide, Jim. There's another category that I think are particularly insidious, because these guys can go either way. They can either be a strategic advantage, or depending upon how you play them out, they can be landmines. So again, the first one, I lumped two things together here, is a mission and mission focus. I cheated a little bit. I used to have 4, but I lumped them together so that I could have 3 in each category. And then the second one's flexibility. And we'll talk about that in a little while. That's a particularly interesting one. And finally, teamwork. And this is one that I've really kind of modified as I've talked to different veterans about their thoughts on teamwork before they got into being a business owner, and what they found out after they're being a business owner. So that's the big picture of what we're going to look at. We'll talk about each one of those 3 categories: the strategic advantages, the landmines, and those that can go either way, and take a little bit of a deeper dive into each of them. Another one, I'd prefer if we could make this a monologue instead of a dialogue instead of a monologue. I almost said that one backwards. A dialogue. So I encourage questions if you want to pop it into the chat room. I'll try to answer it as we go along, and then certainly we'll have time for questions and comments at the end. And kind of the way I generally do things is I'm going to go through here. I'm going to cover everything in the depth we need to cover it. I don't particularly feel compelled to fill up the time until 3 o'clock, and if we get done with stuff before 3, I'm fine with that, as long as Mirza's fine with that, and as I'm sure everybody's got other stuff to do. So let me launch in then to the first category of the strategic advantages, and that's discipline. One of the things I've found as I've worked with small business owners is that small business owners and entrepreneurs are particularly susceptible to a disease that I've started to call entrepreneurial ADHD, or shiny object syndrome. I'm working with a client right now who has got issues with that. Folks go down, as they start their business, they start down the stream thinking they're doing one thing, and then something comes along and they say, "Oh, that looks nice," and they go going down a track that takes them maybe 30 degrees off of where they started, and then they run into something else and it says, "Oh, that looks nice," and they take another jump, and then maybe they're going 30 degrees in the opposite direction. They start adding these things on, and pretty soon the business owner is going in 87 different directions and has no idea where he wants to go with his business. This is one thing that I think veterans who are business owners, from your experiences and what you learned in the military, can really benefit you, and that you learn discipline. I had a very interesting experience a little while ago, actually a couple months ago now. I was talking to a friend of mine in another part of my business, who her son just went to, in fact, he should be just about now graduating from basic training at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. And he sent his mom this letter about halfway through basic, and it really echoed on this point, because it said, boy, what I am really learning in basic training is the discipline to keep focused. And that's the kind of thing that we as veteran entrepreneurs can bring to the table, that I find a lot of our other non-veteran business owner friends don't have. They get that shiny object syndrome. They get the entrepreneurial ADHD, and like they said, they go in 8 zillion different directions. And it kind of hits the first 2 bullet points there, the not easily distracted and stay focused on task. And again, also related to the discipline, and this will come back in another area a little later on, that I find entrepreneurs, more than their veteran entrepreneurs, more than their non-veteran counterparts, are really driven to get things done. So that's a huge advantage. So again, the key, and it's no real lesson on how to do these. It's just, leverage these, follow along, use that discipline that came out of the service, and it usually comes naturally to your strategic advantage. So that's the first of the strategic advantages. John or Jim, if you could, here we go. Thank you. The next one, again, this used to be a little more narrow thing, and I've broadened it out just to call it character. I used to just call it work ethic. But one of the things that veterans have going for them is that they come to the table that we're used to hard work. That's what we saw in the military, and we're used to doing that. Non-veterans, maybe not so much. Then we've got the fact that you're not going to slack off. You want to do things, you want to do things right, and you'll do things until you get them done. So kind of put those three factors together: doing things right, that's a critical one, and doing it until you get it done. Again, that ties right back in with the discipline. And then we're used to you don't finish the task until it's done, rather than doing it halfway and moving on. And again, I see that so much with non-veterans who are business owners. They'll get something half started. Again, they'll get that entrepreneurial ADHD we talked about in the last section, and then they'll jump over to something else. So really use this and leverage this to your benefit as a veteran business owner. And finally, and these kind of go without saying, veterans come to the table with honesty and integrity. We've all known folks in the service who didn't have those two traits, and they generally just didn't survive. So those are the pieces about character, the second of the strategic advantages. The last one that I threw in is kind of a fun one. We think it's fun, but we used to work long odd hours. I remember the time that I was in the service, sitting out in the field in Germany. There was no such thing as a day off. It's funny, I did this with a group here in Indianapolis, a veterans group of veteran small business owners, and we had one guy who was in the Navy, and he talked about, being on ship. This really resonated with him. He says it was just constant working your watch day after day after day after day, and you just kept it going. And we're not locked into that 9-to-5 mentality. We'll do the hours that we need to do in order to get the job done. And that ties back with character, ties back with discipline. And I put that last bullet in there because that's something. And actually, let me back up just a bit. One of the things I do is I talk to people, especially those who want to be business owners, and try to find out what their script is on weekends. Because if I remember when I was in corporate America, watching folks and listen to the news one day, and they talk about this all the time on the news. It's Wednesday. Well, what's Wednesday mean? And it's halfway through till Friday. Everybody in that's an overgeneralization. Everybody in corporate America seems to live for Friday. And you see all these things about this. Geico made a commercial about that one with the camel wandering through the Cubeville, saying, "Okay, what day is it?" And, it's Wednesday. It's Hump Day. And I remember seeing a sign someplace that said, if you don't believe in life after death, be here at 5 o'clock on Friday. But again, that's a script of employees. Employees think about, we work from 9 to 5, and when 5 o'clock comes, we're done. And business owners don't think that way. They think that, as I said, kind of semi-facetiously in the PowerPoint, that Friday means there's 2 more working days till Monday. And that's just the way that entrepreneurs are hardwired. So that's the strategic advantages we bring to the table as veterans who are going into business. You know, the discipline, the character, and the ability to work long, odd hours. Any comments, questions, thoughts at this point? Let's open it up for a second.
I think you're doing a pretty good job explaining everything so far.
Oh, great. I never know if I'm being crystal clear or have everybody just so totally confused they don't know what to ask.
No, it's pretty solid so far.
Okay, great. This is the easy part, guys. It gets tougher from here because now we're going to get into the landmines. Because these are the things, again, that I found that we bring from our backgrounds on the military. And these things served us well in the military. But when we turn into entrepreneurs, they don't serve us so well. But you know, the first of those landmines is structure. And think about this: when you were in the military, and as Mirza said, I retired as a colonel, so you would think, oh God, you were a colonel, you had a lot of freedom. Well, not so much, because I know my last job in the Army Reserve was being the Deputy Chief of Staff of Operations for the 88th RS Reserve Support Command at Fort Snelling, Minnesota. And it was amazing how much of what I did was driven by you know, what the Chief of Staff laid out for us that particular weekend. So there's just as much structure at the top of the food chain in the military as there is at the bottom of the food chain. It's just maybe not so tightly obvious. But again, here's the key. When you were in the military, somebody else dictated everything you did and when you did it. You know, if you wanted to know what you're doing at 1400 this afternoon, well, if you were in the military and this was military, right? You know, what am I doing at 1400 or 2 o'clock, depending on which set of time you want to use. All you do is go look at the training schedule, and that would tell you exactly what you're going to do. And if you tried to mess with the training schedule, you heard about it. I remember when I was here for at Fort Benjamin Harrison, when it existed, for my Adjutant General Officer Advanced course. It was a great 3-month course shoved into 6 months, and they tried to fill up the training schedule with all of this, you know, frankly, kind of meaningless stuff. We had a lot of guest speakers, and these guest speakers had a proclivity for canceling. So our class leader was really good at, you know, let's say we had a guest speaker from 1 to 3, and he'd cancel out. Our class leader was really good at going around and trying to talk to the guy who had the block from 3 to 4:30 and saying, hey dude, can you come in at 1 o'clock? And the instructor was always happy to do that if he wasn't teaching someplace else at the time. But our class leader got dinged. Oh, you messed with the training schedule. The training schedule is sacrosanct. You can't be screwing with that. So it's that kind of structure, and we'll talk about this also because this relates. And this is a side comment I should make. I'm talking about these factors as if they were independent. In reality, they're all interlinked and interdependent, and one kind of bleeds into the other, and they all work together. But here's where the landmine part comes in with structure. Is, you know, when you're an entrepreneur, you don't have the luxury of looking at a training schedule to see what you're going to do at 2 o'clock. You don't have a boss to go to and say, you know, what should I do now, boss? It's totally up to you. And I see a lot of folks that flounder with that, at least initially. Again, they're so used to having that structure and have been conditioned that they've got to go check with somebody else to see what they're going to do. Or they just go look at the training schedule. And I remember being out in the field and if we're having people come and look at us and make sure that we were doing exactly what was on the training schedule at the time it was supposed to be done on the training schedule, and we get whacked if we deviated from it. Now you're just making it up as you go along. So that's really hard for some folks. So my suggestion, and this is the good news, I've put a little bit of what I've called a countermeasure in for each one of the landmines, and a lot of these talk about, you know, bringing some of the skills that you used in the military forward and applying them as entrepreneurs. Because I remember, and I can't speak for the Air Force or the Navy or the Coast Guard or the Marines, but I know we had in the Army a really good yearly training plan development process. And what I found as we did that was it was really exactly the same process that we use as entrepreneurs to build our business plan as we go forward. And so I just suggest using that as a basis. If you've still got that process in your stuff someplace, use that as a basis for building your business plan, and build your business plan in almost exactly the manner as you built training plans when you were in their service. The only thing you'll be missing is with the yearly training plan process, we always started with the commander's guidance and the commander's intent. Well, that would be you. So you then need to make up your own commander's guidance, and we'll talk about that a little bit later when we talk about decision making. But again, just bring that process forward. Build your business plan as if you would build your yearly training plan. That also very much helps you in your time management, because that's one thing I've found, and I still struggle with this one, is time management as an entrepreneur and a small business owner, because you get pulled in so many different directions. Again, that's where the discipline helps. So great countermeasure to help you, superimpose some of the structure you used in the military into your business as an entrepreneur. The second landmine is decision making. Again, this seems a little strange, I think, to some people, because I think that at least a stereotype that I've heard from people who've not been in the military is that military people are decisive, even perhaps decisive to a fault. But I found, in fact, from the inside looking out, unless you were a commander, now that I will take a little bit of a sidestep from this, that if you were in a position where you were some sort of a commander, you were, if you will, exempt from some of the stuff I'm going to talk about. Not totally, because you always had your boundaries in which you could make your decisions. And if it was outside of the boundaries, you had to go check with the boss. But other than that, you didn't have the latitude to make a lot of decisions. What you had was the ability to become a really good recommender, and I don't want to minimize that skill. That is a really good skill, but you really became a good recommender. I had that really, and again, folks at higher levels are not exempt from this. I had that really hammered home to me when I moved from being a commander late in my journey through the Army. I'd been a battalion commander for 2 years, got picked up for full colonel, and then moved into a colonel command slot, and I was the commandant of a U.S. Army Reserve Forces school that then, in a restructuring, restructured into a training brigade and a training division. And when I was there, I had some pretty good latitude to be a decision maker. But then my tenure as a commander was over. Oh, and I had this big old honkin' oak desk. It was wonderful, and big old leather chair, lay back, put my boots up on the desk, and it was very cool. Then my tenure as a commander ended, and I went up to be the Deputy Chief of Staff Training, again up at the 88th Regional Support Command. And I moved from my office that was probably 12 by 20. It was, and I had get this, I had 2 leather sofas and this big old honking desk with my big oak chair. And I moved from that to about a 6 by 8 office with a little. I may have had a double pedestal steel desk since I was a full colonel, and a little swivelly chair. And all of a sudden, I was in a very different world. I was back in the typical Army person's world. And I remember if I had a good idea, what I thought was a good idea at least, I had to take it to my boss, the Deputy Chief of Staff Operations, and he couldn't make a decision on it. So we'd go trotting across the hall to the Chief of Staff and tell the Chief of Staff our idea, and it had suddenly gone from my idea to our idea, of course, after I talked to my boss. And then we talked to the Chief of Staff, and Chief of Staff say, that's a really great idea. Let's go talk to the deputy. And we'd talk to the one-star deputy, and the one-star deputy'd say, oh, that's a really good idea. I can't make a decision. Yeah, figure that's Brigadier General, can't make a decision. Well, let's go talk to the two-star commander. So, we were nothing more than really good recommenders, and we couldn't make a single decision. Well, maybe we could make some, but we always had to run everything up to the boss. But you know what? When you're out in there as an entrepreneur, you got no chain of command. You look at who do I need to go to for this decision, and it's you. So that's an idea that I think folks really have to just kind of get used to, that you're now in charge of your own decisions. Now I think a part of that, the cynic in me says that a part of that was so that nobody, we could always find somebody else to blame when the decision went bad. It wasn't my fault. I didn't make that decision. I bucked it up the chain of command. They made that decision. But you've got no chain of command to buck it up. So, two suggestions here for countermeasures is first, and there's a bunch of these out there, and we had actually some pretty good ones in the military. If you've got some stuff on decision-making stuff, processes that you brought from the military with you, use that, because theoretically we had some really good stuff. And then the big thing, and this is something that I really work with my coaching clients on, because it's not something you can really teach somebody. It's folks just got to wrap their heads around the idea that you're now the one that's in charge of everything now that you're a business owner, and you're the one that has to make your own decisions. So some folks have a little trouble getting around that one, but it's an important one to get used to, because again, I see people floundering because they got something they want to do, and they're just so indecisive about it because they never had that culture of making decisions themselves ingrained in them, because they always ran something up the chain of command to get a decision made. So that's the second of the landmines, decision making. The third one is failure. This is a tricky one because it's so much different. Now I have talked to some people, and I've been retired for a few years, so culturally things may be changing. I talked to a guy after I did this presentation not long ago who told me, he was a lieutenant colonel, that some of this has been a little bit mellowed, if you will, and then I did this with another guy who was a veteran, and he'd been out for a little while, and I started talking about this, and he went right to, and he didn't have the PowerPoint in front of him, he didn't go right to that first bullet there that's the mantra, failure is not an option. And he just ripped that one right out. As I said, first thing you got to do is rewrite your scripts on failure. And he says, oh yeah, I remember how many times did I hear failure is not an option, failure is not an option. And I had this really drilled into me when I mentioned, from my time when I was a school commandant and we transitioned into a brigade of a training division. This was in a total restructuring of the Army Reserve school system. We restructured from geographically focused schools that were teaching pretty much everything to regionally focused brigades and battalions that were functionally focused. I happened to have the professional development brigade. We were teaching, officer and NCO professional development courses, but as we were doing this, it was about an 18-month transition process. I remember sitting in countless meetings with my boss, the division commander, and General Joe he'd start the meeting out with, well, this was the other there were 5 of us who were brigade commanders. He'd start the meeting out with, failure is not an option, failure is not an option, failure is not an option. And then as we discussed things going through the meeting, he'd be sure to remind us, failure is not an option. And then we'd get to the end, and just to make sure we understood what he told us 27 other times in the meeting, he'd write, just, gentlemen, don't forget, failure is not an option. So you get that drilled into your head. And what I find when folks get into this failure is not an option, zero defects mentality, is you always do the most risk-averse, most conservative thing that you can think of to do. And then that does not optimize what happens to you in the long run. So now you come out of that environment and you start your business, and now you're in an environment where not only is failure encouraged, or is failure an option, it's encouraged. And it's a matter of getting your head around that. There's a classic story about that one from, well, actually 2 classic stories from IBM back in the days when Thomas Watson was the president and CEO of IBM. The first one is a quote that I see at least attributed to him all the time, is that, in order to double your rate of success, you got to double your rate of failure. And that's such a dramatic shift in the way of thinking for, again, a lot of folks who've come up in that failure is not an option mentality, that it's hard to get your head around. The other one attributed to IBM was this story where this sales manager had just blown a sale, and it was a big one. And he had, it was like $10 million, and this was back in the 50s, I think. And he'd sat there, and he was writing out his letter of resignation when he gets the call, Mr. Watson would like to see you. So he finishes up his letter of resignation, goes up to the boss's office, and walks in, and he just says, Mr. Watson, let me save you the trouble. Here's my resignation. I'm quitting. I just blew this one. I cost the company a lot of money. And Watson just looked at him and said, well, what'd you think? You think I was calling you up here to fire you? I can't fire you now. I just invested $10 million in your education. Now go back and get a return on that investment. And it's that kind of mentality that entrepreneurs have to adopt, is recognizing that unless you really fail badly at something and totally run the business into the ground, the best thing you can do is try stuff, fail, learn from it, change what you do, and move forward. So you got to just develop a tolerance for it. And one of the things that, again, I can't speak for the Air Force, but I know when we were planning operations, one of the parts of the operation planning was a risk assessment. Take that risk assessment process and build it into your planning process and decision-making process, and start to look at, what's the risk associated with this. You don't want to go stumbling blindly into things, but look at what's the risk involved in something, run it through that risk assessment, and then that'll help you decide, is this an acceptable level of risk or not. But recognize that nothing is risk-free, and the more risk-free you try to make things, the more they don't optimize the success of your business. So that's the last of the landmines, guys and gals. So again, structure, decision-making, and failure are the 3 things that you bring that overly structured, well, maybe not overly structured environment, but highly structured environment. The idea that you're a good recommender, and the scripts on failure is not an option, bring them with you into your new world as entrepreneurs, and you've got to adjust your thinking to that new world. So again, those are the three landmines. Now the last three are the fun three. These are the ones that can go either way. You can use certain elements of them to leverage and use them as strategic advantages. There's also elements that can be landmines. So we'll go through these three. The first one is, and this is actually, I've lumped two together here, mission and mission of focus. These come as a strategic advantage, again, because mission, it's in your DNA. We grew up in an environment where everything was focused on accomplishing the mission, and the mission was everything. You know, you were going to do it or you're going to be found on the road dead. And that drove absolutely everything we did. And you can use that as a strategic advantage because you can then use that to drive your priorities. Looping back into discipline, once you get your mission straight and you use your mission focus and you stay disciplined to following the mission, that also helps you keep from getting entrepreneurial ADHD and going off to the side of the road and doing 57 things you don't need to be doing to accomplish, you know, what it is that you want to do with your business. Where mission and mission focus can become a landmine, though, is when you go down the road with your mission, and again, you've got that laser focus on accomplishing that mission, and you go past the time when it's time to change the mission. Because if you look at the last bullet on the landmine portion there, when you were in the military, something like decision making and something like structure, it was always somebody else's mission. Now it's yours. So you've got to make your mission. And again, as a landmine, what I see happens is folks will be going down the road, and something will happen with their business that they should be changing it. You know, maybe they've got a business model that just doesn't work. They've got a business model that just doesn't work. They're pursuing a market niche, perhaps, that's not big enough. There's not enough money in it. Here's one I find from a lot of guys who are working as what I call solopreneurs, who think they have a business, but what they've really done is monetize their hobby. And they think they're going to get rich doing this, and recognize they got to change their business model because they can only do so many billable hours in a week. So it's not recognizing when it's time to change that I find is where this becomes a landmine. That folks will go on with an untenable business model long past the time that they should have pulled the plug on it, and the time they recognize it is when they run out of cash and credit, and that's just too late. So for countermeasures, you know, one of the things, and there's actually one, I need to put one on there that I heard at a presentation a month or so ago that I just realized is not on there, is first, as the guy who was doing this one, who's a very successful serial entrepreneur, said, know your number. Says when you start your business, you need to know the number that if you get to there in terms of losses or debt or lack of revenue, you know when it's time to quit and pull the plug, and be able to pull the plug on it. Because I find out, and I've done this a couple of times myself before I figured out it was time to restructure. Entrepreneurs will say, well, and you know, the other thing, entrepreneurs are inveterate optimists. We'll go along and we'll say, you know, I just got to give it one more year, and this is the mission, focus, and discipline kicking it in. Give it one more year, and I'll get this thing turned around. And the year comes and goes, and it's not turned around. Say, well, one more year. It's knowing the number, knowing it's time to pull the plug, knowing it's time to do something different. So that goes along with the countermeasure of, you know, constantly monitoring results to know exactly where you're at, so that you know I'm getting close to my number, and also remain open to new opportunities, because things will come along. This is counterintuitive to what I said about discipline a little while ago. Sometimes if you see a new opportunity, your model's not working, you think this opportunity is going to make my model work, go ahead and take them. Because sometimes it is time to make a left turn or a right turn, and do something different. And then those last two bullets really more address the mission. The first two bullets under countermeasures address the mission focus. The second two address the mission. Why'd you start the business to begin with? Here's something I don't always see that people articulate. They don't remember, why is it that I started this thing to begin with? And once you articulate that, then that becomes your mission. Here's the purpose of this business. Here's why I'm in business. Here's what I intend to do. And then you go back and leverage that strategic advantage of discipline, and use that to help drive you through to do what it is that you want to do to be successful. So that's the first one that can go either way, mission and mission focus. The second one, I just recently added this one to this presentation, this idea of flexibility. And this is one that, again, I think, let me just give you my experience, and this is totally anecdotal with absolutely no empirical evidence to back it up. And I can't speak for the Air Force or the Navy or the Marines or the Coast Guard. I did have a Navy guy validate this a little bit. What I found in my 30 years in the Army, that there were really two armies. There was the Army in the field, and then there was the Army in garrison. The Army in the field operated really more on that strategic advantage side. And the bullet there kind of says it all. When you're in the field, you used a lot of flexibility because you recognized that your plan was only good until the first shot was fired. And then you maybe not necessarily abandoning the plan, but you recognize it's time to change the plan. We got to go around and move stuff and change our approach. Again, which goes back to that what I just talked about with mission focus, remaining open to new opportunities. That was the Army in the field. Now, we were very flexible, very nimble. We changed things a lot. But then as soon as we got in the gates of the post or the Kaserne, if you were in Germany, we transformed into an entirely different Army, because there, the first bullet says it all. Everything was driven by an authorization document. It was an Army regulation, a field manual, a technical manual, any other lists of two-digit manual titles. And if you wanted to do anything, and I spent most of my time in the active Army in the personnel business. This was before it became fancy to call it HR. But there, everything, when you get a request to do something, the first thing you do is go look in, what does the Army regulation say about this? And if the Army regulation said you could do it, you'd go ahead and do it. If the Army regulation said you couldn't do it, then you rejected it. And then the trickiest part is the second bullet there. If the Army regulation was silent on it and didn't say one way or the other, by definition, you still couldn't do it. I had this really illustrated for me a couple of years, actually it was just a year ago. I do some work with the Indiana Employer Supported the Guard and Reserve Committee. And we were having a training last summer, and one of the trainings was an NCO from an honor guard was doing a presentation on flag etiquette, and somewhere and he was quoting the ARs and all of this, which was absolutely appropriate. But somebody asked him a question. One of the ESGR volunteers asked him a question, and it was a kind of a weird question, frankly. But he had to stop back and think about it, and he says, "Well, the regulation doesn't say anything about that, so therefore you can't do it." And that was the way we lived our lives when we were in garrison. So here's the thing as a countermeasure for you as an entrepreneur. Now, there is no documentation. You know, you have no Army regulation, field manual, whatever to tell you, can I do this, can I do that, can I do the other thing. There is absolutely no documentation. So here's the good news, guys, gals. You get to write your own documentation. You get to decide how you want to do it and document it up. I should add this to the strategic advantages pieces too, because this is also a strength that you bring to the table, because when I work with my non-veteran coaching clients, they are horrible about building processes and systems and documenting them. They are so flexible, they make everything up as they go along, even the 4th or 5th or 6th time they've done it. This is one where you can bring this focus, and again, here comes focus back again, and and determine, I need to determine the process or system by which this needs to be done, put it together, document it, and then follow it, and you'll be way ahead of your civilian counterparts in building processes and systems. And again, I see that as a downfall of a lot of small businesses, because they make stuff up as they go along and fly by the seat of their pants, which, short term you can do, long term it'll get you in trouble. And so the final one is teamwork. Seems kind of odd, because the beauty is, especially if you're in small units, I think some of this is not so strong if you spent time in the equivalent of whatever the Navy or Air Force equivalent was of an Army brigade or division headquarters. It was a little bit different environment there, but particularly in squad and platoon and company level, and pretty much to battalion level, you grew up working in a team, and everybody was totally understanding of the role of everybody into the team, and recognize the interdependencies that you had with your team members. You knew what the guy on your left was going to do, you knew what the guy on your right was going to do, you knew what the guy in front of you was going to do, you knew what the guy behind you was going to do, and you counted on that happening, and they counted on you doing what they knew you were going to do. So, you really became a tightly interwoven, interdependent team. So that you can use as a strategic advantage after you get to a point, and this obviously doesn't apply to solopreneurs, but once you start to hire people, start building that team culture, so that everybody works together as a nice tight unit, just like you did when you were a small unit. But in many cases, there's no team when you start out in your business. There's no one to rely on for help, and this I think goes to an even bigger level. And I had a Navy guy when I was doing this presentation once bring this up, and I'd not thought about this, but he said, when we were on the ship, we had a really tight social support system, and with all of us and all of my shipmates. And now I'm running this construction company. I got no shipmates. I'm out on my own, and it's really a scary feeling. And so that really just takes this to another level. So I say this as a countermeasure, and easier said than done. Learn to operate on your own, and I think the "and" is probably the critical piece here. Build a support system around you. I know I am involved with a group of people here in Indy who we've kind of created our own support system. It's a group of 10 or 15 of us who are primarily people who are in business on our own, have breakfast 2 Fridays a month, and most of the time we spend just kind of bouncing stuff off of each other, again, as a social support system. But if you go into entrepreneurship expecting to have that same kind of support system that you had when you were in the military, you'll have some troubles adjusting, at least initially. So I think that's it, folks. If you go to we got the last slide on there. Yeah, thank you, Jim. Again, the strategic advantages give you, I think, huge advantages over entrepreneurs that are coming out of corporate America. Folks that don't have the background that you have, and you leverage those to accelerate your business growth. And you've also got, again, those landmines. If you step on them, they'll kill your business, but the good news is they're all defeatable. It's all stuff that you can learn, get your head around, and perhaps change the way you operate a little bit. And then the third category, just recognize that those are the ones that can go either way, and you got to make sure that you operate on the side of using the strategic advantages, and don't let them turn into landmines for you. So I think that's it, guys. There's my contact information. If you'd like to get hold of me and have a further conversation about this, I'd be more than happy to do that with you. Let me just ask now if there's any questions, comments, thoughts, and if so, great. If not, I'll kick it back to Mirza to wrap us up.
First off, I'd like to thank you for your presentation. It was good.
Oh, you're welcome.
I guess my question would be, if you had one tip or one strategy that you feel most passionate about, or that you would like to drive home the most, what would that be? Like, what tip?
Great question. I think if you boil all of this down, I think the one that I think would be the most important short term is determine the purpose for your business. Why am I in business to begin with? What am I doing this for? Create your mission, and then use that mission to drive all your priorities. And again, use that strategic advantage of discipline. Tie it in with your mission, and as I said before, at the same time, know your number and make sure that what you're doing is actually going to help you accomplish that mission, rather than I'm just going to do 57 things to keep myself busy. I think that's the one thing that short term can serve you the best. The other stuff then will take care of itself. This is a great question. It's like I said, the thing I find folks doing is that they get caught up in entrepreneurial ADHD, and they're going 87 different directions at once. They're totally unfocused, and they're not making money because a lot of the stuff they're doing isn't making them, if in fact it's not cutting into their bottom line and is a losing part of their business in terms of their financials.
Excellent, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks both to Jim and John for the great question. It seems like we don't have any questions on YouTube and Google+. I don't know if John and John still have any comments or questions. If not, Mr. Patton, thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome, Mirza. It's been a pleasure.
As I said, the presentation will be recorded. It will be available on our resource library. And we look forward to see you all the next month, August, with a new webinar. If you have any questions, again, Mr. Patton has shared his email. Feel free to reach out to him as well as to us if you have any questions with regard to Institute for Veterans and Military Families. Again, thanks for watching. Thanks everybody for being present. Mr. Patton, thank you very much. It was great having you with us, and we look forward to have more opportunities to collaborate with you. Thanks, and keep entrepreneuring, everybody.